All right. Trying this a different way. All right. So we're just going to wait for Michael to join us, and then we will be able to get everything kind of squared away over here. So exciting. All right. Yeah, it's going to take a couple of minutes. Sorry about that. Okay. Yep. Yep. There we go. Yep. All right. Here we go. Like just adding people.
Did it work?
Oh, all right. Hold on. Do I have? I do. Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear
Okay,
you.
it worked.
Yes, there we go. All right. Oh, hold on. Oh, Jesus. Have this thing connected, and sometimes it doesn't work that well. All right. All right. All right. So
There we go.
this is Michael.
Hello.
uh, hello, everyone. So I made this public, so maybe you will get some fans
Okay,
joining.
that works.
All right. So let's see. So we are mostly going to talk about like that your work with domestic violence victims, and mostly male victims, with a little bit of like talking about other things.
Sure.
So you work in a Connecticut organization, and you're like the only male, and then you're the only male clinician on top of that,
Yes,
right?
I'm the only clinician. I'm the only male.
Uh,
I'm the
yeah,
only male clinician.
clinician, yes.
Yes.
Um, so you work mostly with high risk and high lethality cases.
Yes.
Yep. All right. And you emphasized this when we talked last week, but you really want to protect the victim. Like it doesn't, in your mind, matter if the victim, male, female, whatever. It's you are protecting the victim.
Yeah, and I think it's a shame that it has to be even said, but yeah, that is the reality that we live in. For me, it is not of any importance who um, I'm working with. I just
Mm-hmm.
want to make sure I'm working with the victim, male,
Right.
female, young, old,
Right. Whichever one.
whichever one.
Right. So I wrote down some questions so that we have our good flow. So what is a typical client for you?
Um, well, I've noticed that regardless of age or gender
Mhm.
or background, typically a typical client is a hardworking, caring, empathetic. Um, they're the type of individual who, when they ask you how you're doing, they actually care about the answer. They are basically wonderful, awesome people. Um, and with that being said, they are very hard on themselves. Although we are our own worst critics, they are also programmed to think less of themselves. Um,
Right, right.
a lot of them have issues from the current situation they're in, but when we look further, most of them have issues in past relationships, kind of dating back to their childhood, and their family
Gotcha.
of origin.
Gotcha. Oh, there we go. Yeah.
Super.
Yeah. I'm really not surprised. Like that's also when I've worked with people who have been domestic violence victims, it's kind of how they are. And I feel like there's kind of this sense of responsibility. Like they had some responsibility to their family, and that their needs weren't considered.
Yes, there's actually a number of either articles or videos I show people, but they all relate back to kind of the empathic person and
Mm,
kind of their childhood. But with that
mm,
being said, like these are the people that a normal person should seek to find and have in their life. Like,
Oh, right.
they are good
Oh, yeah.
people. They are never going to let them down. They would never turn their back on you.
Mm,
They would never disrespect. None of, they give out none
right.
of what they endure. Um,
Right. Right. Yeah. So these are the very caring people, and also like people like that feel badly when they're in these situations, like they did something wrong instead of their partner is wrong. Yeah.
yeah, there's a lot of work around. Well, because when they feel like, we all, I think, as humans, can look back at any situation and think or wish they did more, whether it's
Right.
a
Right.
job, a relationship. And then when we explore kind of things they've done, I already know kind of the avenue that I'm going to end up at, but it boils down to, if there was something they could have done, they would have, because they did do everything. And it's a way of illustrating that it's not them, because they're fundamentally not capable of doing to other humans what has been done to them. They would
Right.
just stop.
Oh, yeah.
No, I can't do that.
Yeah. So what's a typical day like for you?
Um, well, that doesn't exist. However, going in, there is something called, something Connecticut does is called the lethality assessment program.
Okay.
But when police are called out and they determine it is a domestic violence situation, they ask a series of questions sort of to determine um, the level of risk or lethality. Based on the responses, um, they will initiate contacting a domestic violence advocate in that moment, calling a hotline, so to say.
Hmm.
And initially, the day begins with seeing how many of those came in. There can be 0, there can be like 12. And essentially, um, those were created because they were finding, like 20 years ago, that people were dying of domestic violence related issues, and there was zero
Right.
contact with domestic violence services. So they do this
Mm,
now as a way of connecting people with services, like, kind of in that moment. Like, person's
that's
getting
really good to know.
arrested, so,
Right.
and then we
Mm.
follow up within like a business day. The next day, we're calling them to more formally offer services, talk to them, and help them with whatever they need. So the day will begin with that. Um, there can be a number of appointments I have with other clients. There's, I think, the typical clinical stuff, phone
Hmm.
calls, collaborating with like DCF or other involved providers. Um, I can assist clients with restraining orders. I meet with children. I meet with adults. Um, Discussing cases with other staff, wondering what to do on certain things. Um, Aside from that, there are components where it's similar to other clinical positions. Um, but again, I get to meet with awesome people every day, so there's the difference
Oh,
between,
yay.
that's definitely
Yeah.
something I notice. Like, I meet with like awesome people who, when they can comprehend a fraction of their worth, like, they just take off.
Oh, gotcha. Yay.
Yeah, yeah,
All right. What do you see as two major issues for male victims?
yeah. Just two? No. I
I'm like the
think,
two major, because I mean that that
yeah,
it's like there's obviously going to be one major, and then there's going to be like something underneath that, and then like probably 10 million other things.
yeah. One thing is, I think they're not weeded out, but other systems that deter, um, I think they're deterred before they even get to us. Um,
Right, right.
like, I
Yeah,
have,
you were talking about the Violence Against Women Act, like that seems already prohibitive, you know?
yes, and it does say anybody can receive services under it, and our agency serves anybody who reaches out, and um, I am definitely an advocate for men reaching out, getting help, and getting services. but again, I'm an advocate for any, for anybody. It's not that I have a favorite.
Right, right.
And
But yeah,
so,
like I mean, I meant for the focus of this to be like male
all right.
domestic violence victims because we don't really like I don't feel like we talk about them, you know, like we
No,
talk a lot about like female victims and all of these things, and female victims have services, and female victims are more likely to reach out, but then you have this kind of like unfortunate societal like block for male victims of domestic violence, and
yes.
it's kind of like, well, they're supposed to suck it up or something.
Yeah, well, it's called there's something called the gender paradigm, which I believe it's like Dr. Donald Dutton speaks of and talks of a lot.
Oh, okay.
And it's essentially a belief of the majority of Western society that domestic violence is a male abuser, female victim, and that's it, unless the woman is defending herself. And a lot of
Yeah.
the domestic violence models sort of follow that. Like the power and
Right.
control wheel that we all see is
Oh, right, right.
that is it comes from the Duluth model, which has that belief. So thankfully the
Gotcha.
times have changed a little bit, but if you look at like the Violence Against Women Act, it's an act against violence against women. That's what created it. But
Right.
to seek funding or research on programs or anything that would
Right.
focus on the impact on males, the Department of Justice, which handles all the funding for all this, they're not approving anything that focuses on anything relating to the impact on anything that specifies male victims.
Man. Wow.
Um,
Yeah.
they'll cover
Yeah.
disenfranchised populations, they'll cover veterans, they will cover undocumented people. There are all sorts of funding and stuff for that, which is good, which there should
Right.
be. But they will fund nothing that focuses on men.
Gotcha.
Seems
Yeah.
like a little
So
problem that
funding,
they don't want to look at. And
right. Oh, yeah. So funding for men, and then also like what is that called? Like just male men not feeling that they can reach out, you know, to like is what I'm hearing as two of the major blocks. Like any other things, because I know we just kind of jumped down to the Violence Against Women Act, but um, yeah,
I mean, and and when we say men aren't comfortable reaching out, there's an element of men are trained to not do this, like boys don't cry, suck it up. Now there's that,
right.
but then also
Don't be a
when men,
wuss, don't let a woman hit you, you know.
or you got to handle
Yeah.
that, or
Oh, right, right. Yeah.
and then there's the other element of, so that can create the men aren't reaching out, but there's also how they're treated when they do. I think
Oh,
a
yeah, yeah.
statistic I said to you is, if a male victim of domestic violence from a female, whether it's physical or not, if there's a law broken and the cops are notified, with the male doing nothing wrong illegally, there's about a 20% chance he's getting arrested too.
Right,
And
right.
I've seen cases where male reports this. Physical evidence or scratches support this. He was also arrested because she said he did this to her with no evidence.
Right. With no evidence. Yeah.
And I have a problem with that, clearly, because now they're both going to be arraigned at court, and I've asked people who work at courts, because I've seen some concerning things, and I said,
Right.
is a female less likely to be charged and convicted of domestic violence charges? And they said yes. And
Right.
so
That they're more likely to be nollied.
they're more likely to be nollied.
Right.
So, and first-time offenders, usually everybody gets away, but I've seen cases where women have been nollied they've had 5 or 6 different cases nollied over time. And so
Right.
she has no record and he had something happen in the past. Well, his record wasn't erased, or he wasn't
Right.
given the
The
given the
same
same
slack.
treatment.
Yeah.
And who's to say
Right.
he wasn't actually a victim? But because of
Right.
what I think the false accusation we will get to uh,
Yep.
later or now, who knows? But
Right. Well, yeah, that's definitely the next thing. So I'm
oh,
like, let me check things off my list. Yeah, so I mean, we can definitely talk like how, like, I mean, there are false accusations, unfortunately. Like, how are they handled right now, and how, like, is there any way to handle them better?
there's definitely a way to handle it better. What I've seen is now let's be honest. But any party can do the false accusation thing.
Hmm.
When you're dealing, with domestic violence, the abusive party is notoriously good at accusing the victim of what it is they're doing. So false
Right.
accusations
Right.
are going to fly. However, the system is a little more sensitive towards listening to one side. Um,
Hmm.
like I've seen male abusers who are doctors or lawyers kind of win over. It happens.
Right.
However,
Right.
I can't tell you how many countless men, even as recent as, I don't know, let's say Friday, a male called for shelter. I had to
Mm.
break away momentarily to handle other calls as they're coming in. And
Right.
complete patience, no upset. He's explaining the story. And now he said, I've even done jail time behind some of this stuff. And he cited false accusations and,
Wow.
anything that I can pick up on, that would indicate that he's not being truthful, he's not being genuine, he's trying to coerce me or convince me. None of it's there. He even
Right.
finished
Right.
some of my sentences, which usually I'm the one finishing people's sentences for them. So,
Yeah.
and
Right. Right.
then it comes back around, the case is being discussed. Oh, well, he has arrest warrants, so we need to refer him to 211. I said, well, that's going to be very common. If you're dealing with
Right.
a male victim of severe domestic violence, I'm not saying you can guarantee that he's been arrested behind stuff, but
Gotcha.
it's much more likely for, um, I think, Bill Eadie, who runs something called the High Conflict Institute.
Okay.
He is a social worker. He is a lawyer. I think he spent like a decade and a half working in like family relations cases. So um, he said a person who's most likely to be permanently affected is a male victim of a female personality disordered abuser because
Oh,
of
gotcha. Yeah.
what they're able to do
Right.
to the
Oh, yeah, definitely. And
using the
manipulate the
system.
system and all of that stuff. Yeah.
All of it.
And I don't have anything actually in here about shelters, but shelters are definitely an issue for men.
Yep.
I'm like, I don't want to throw anyone under the rug. But I know some of the agencies in Connecticut will pay for a night or two at a hotel for a male victim. And in my opinion, I'm like, well, what is that going to do? Like, you're taking them out of the situation for 2 days, and I
Mm-hmm.
know, like, when, I've said this to you, when we were talking, one of my friends was uh, in he was a male victim of domestic violence. And when I would reach out to places and just be like, what can he do? She took his cell phone, she took his birth certificate, she destroyed everything. What can he do? What can he do? And like, the police were just kind of like, well, I mean, when he's ready, and it was just like, oh, so she gets to have this control over him and he has no recourse, and it was really scary, to think that, like, he was suffering so much, and he was suffering at the hands of someone who had a personality disorder. Well, I feel like, anyway, because, like,
No,
just the
I think
interactions. Yeah.
you have
Yeah.
to commit domestic violence to, once it gets to a degree,
Right.
especially in the high risk. I've yet to meet somebody, I've yet to work with a person who was not dealing with a personality disordered abuser, and I'm
Right.
asked all the
Right.
time, or I'm told that I cannot, diagnose people I've
Right.
never
Right.
met, which is true. I can't, but I can tell
Right.
you
Right.
what their
We should never do that.
diagnosis.
Right.
Um,
However, when you interact with them, sometimes you can be like, yeah, I kind of feel like these are at least some traits. Yeah.
yeah, and
But you were saying that other people who are in your agency don't think that there's a mental health aspect, that there's a personality disorder aspect in abuse.
yes, and that's went from like frustrating to it's my duty to teach them. It boils down to they've been here before me, and yes, I'm brought in as a clinician who looks at things clinically, whatever that means. But and I
Right.
think even when we look at the struggles that we're having, maybe with the police and their bias, and they're doing things to address that, which is good, but I said
Yeah.
it illustrates that there is a bias. So,
Right. Right.
and so
Yeah.
with the other outside systems, they're not clinical, they're not trained to pick up on these kind of things. Whereas
Right. And
people
that's
like,
another barrier because you were saying that they're ill-equipped to handle any of this, you know.
yes,
Yeah.
and that
Or
ill-equipped
to
is
even
that
identify it, anything. Yeah.
they're actually, well, if you talk to one of these individuals for like 10 minutes, um,
Yeah.
you
Oh
are
yeah.
going to feel bad for them, unless you are highly trained. You're going to feel
Right.
bad
Right.
for them. You're going to think about the horrible person they are dealing with and how much
Right.
you want to help them, but they're completely empty of feelings and emotions, and they're conning people. So when you go
Right.
to
Oh yeah,
family court
definitely.
hearings, they're only but so long. So these really deep, dark patterns, when police come out, a victim is much more likely to admit anything that they've done, even years ago, that has no relevance on today, or they're convinced
Right.
they
Oh
did
yeah, yeah.
something when they didn't. So you have a person who's calm, cool, and collected, or playing whatever emotion that they feel is necessary, versus a person
Oh
who's
yeah.
completely blown up. Yes, it's my fault. I did everything. I'm a horrible person.
Oh right, right.
Versus a person who said, yeah, they did this to me. I'm really tired of it. I can't believe, they keep getting away. So it's very weird
Right.
how, it
How
works
they can.
against them.
Yeah.
And then, not that we want victims to lie or something, but
Right, right.
there's a lot of work done on,
But
you
just
know,
not say all of the other
not
things. Well,
sabotaging. They get abusers
oh
get
yeah,
hired
yeah.
their
That's true.
victims to
Yeah.
sabotage
Yeah.
themselves. And so it's
Well, and I
about,
think one of the issues with personality disorders, kind of ties back into, the personality of the victim. So the personality of the victim, like, maybe they don't feel very worthy. And, what I've been like seeing on like YouTube when I watch videos about, people who have narcissistic personality disorder or whatnot, is that they start with the love bomb phase and like, oh, you're so wonderful, you're so great. And that's how these very, very kind people end up in situations like this, because it's not like that at first. It's just kind of it ends up like, oh, this person really values me. Oh, I feel so good. And then they start devaluing,
and they start,
oh, you can never do anything right. And then, it gets to this point, you know.
they present as everything. They
Oh,
present
yeah.
and they present as everything any person would want, and
Right. Oh,
they
yeah,
they,
definitely.
they create, it's almost like a euphoria, but it creates the belief this is why it never worked with anyone else. And if that's who they
Mm,
were, they would be the perfect people for everybody.
right. Right. But it's
But
a mask.
the mask.
Right. Right. Yep. So I have the Thurman versus the City of Torrington, which we talked about the other day, the 1986 uh, case in Connecticut that I think it was just within the state, right? I don't think it went to like the Supreme Court or anything.
No, I know they
Um,
sued the state. I mean, other states may have sort of taken, heed
oh
in
yeah,
what happened, but
right. Because
it
that ended up with it was a cause for reform across the United States, and it was mandatory arrest during domestic violence calls, and that's kind of where we're getting into that, kind of dynamic of, well, if someone has to be arrested, you're saying 20% of the time, it's also going to be the male, or it is going to be the male.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so a lot of things that happened have had some benefits, and they've
Mhm.
also had downfalls, so what the
Right.
law entailed is, they don't need evidence or proof. They need, if probable cause exists, which basically means more likely than not something happened, which is a very light threshold. So while
Mhm.
it can create a lot of incidences of people getting arrested when they did not do anything, it also
Right.
does provide a lot of protection for the victim, because it could get people arrested, and protective orders will put them out of the home. So whereas the cops are just coming out, leaving, and going home, and who knows what happens to these people, very small charges like disorderly conduct, which I think one of the things is like making unreasonable noise. So you can scream a little bit and get arrested for disorderly conduct. That could be enough to get somebody arrested, get them out of the
Mhm.
home for a period of time, and allow this person to create safety. However, when we look at the false accusations and focusing on men, a man can do nothing wrong. And if a woman calls the police,
Oh yeah.
he's arrested for disorderly conduct, because I've even had retired police officers, not that they can, they could present to almost any scene and arrest somebody for that charge, because
Right. Right.
it's so broad in general. Now, yes, does this happen to women too? Absolutely. Um, but more often than not, I've seen calls where there's evidence supporting what the man is saying and only words supporting what the female's saying, and yet
Mhm.
the favor is tipped towards, the female. I've seen males get
Right.
put out of their homes and arrested, and
Yeah.
residential stay
Yeah.
protective orders placed on them, where there's no evidence that they even did anything wrong, and they have evidence
Right.
supporting the abuse and scratches. They have scratches on their neck and things of that nature.
Right.
So
Oh
it's a
yeah.
little worrisome to me. I kind of question the judgment at times.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And when we talked the other day, you actually said something that was really interesting. You said that the highest couples who have like domestic violence reports are actually women on women domestic violence, or lesbian um,
Yeah.
domestic violence, which I just we always like there's just that kind of idea that you were talking about, where like men are the aggressors, men are the ones that have to protect women and all of these other things, but then like when you look at it, like at the statistics, it's women on women who are most violent in their relationships, and then like actually gay men are not very violent, or at least
Not
not calling
as.
the police, maybe, like
Not
when
as.
they're right, not as not as violent as yeah, the women on women violence, which I thought was really interesting. The other thing is, like what it's like for you to be the only male in an all female environment. I like I'm gonna like say something that's not PC, and I expect that many of my friends are not gonna like this, but like if I had a chance to work with an all female crew again, it would be very selective, if at all. Like I don't think that I would work in an all female environment again. So
It's interesting. Being a social
yeah.
worker, I mean, I have a license in drug and alcohol counseling and social work, so the majority of my professional career has been around, predominantly women. Um,
Mhm. Oh yeah.
However, yeah, like there have been men, and I wouldn't say they didn't last long for reasons relating to sexism or anything, like that. Um, but it's interesting because, well, when men reach out for services, or is one staff complaining how another staff handles men? Do the male clients that end up talking to me complain about other female, like,
Mm,
do all the men complain about the same people when they reach me? That happens.
ooh,
um
yeah.
and now I think one of the other questions which will tie into this is, it's not a direct accusation or anything, but research does support that although trauma work comes from the heart, it's not uncommon for young 20-something-year-old females to gravitate towards this field because of their
Oh
own
yeah.
biases and experiences. And
Right, right.
when it
Yeah,
comes to women,
yeah.
a certain type of male is comfortable approaching women. So women have the
Mhm.
belief that all men are a certain way, which in case it's not true.
Right,
But
right.
I there are some people I work with who I've yet to see them actually work with a man, and I try
Mm,
to illustrate that it's not different.
right.
Well, they say, well, I
Oh
don't want to
yeah.
get on, which, point taken. I think males are much more likely to hit on female clinicians than it's happened, but I think I will give
Yep.
that one.
Yeah,
But
and
like,
I'm like thinking, I'm like, none of the clients who I've had who have been victims of domestic violence who are male have ever hit on me.
they're
It's
very
like
appropriate. They're very respectful.
right, right. It's the
They're
guys who are more the Jesus they have like what is that called? Oh my gosh, they're more symptomatic early on. Like they have like more of the serious issues that I'm like, yep, chronically ill. Yep,
yeah,
yeah, yeah. But yeah, like it is a certain type of person who does gravitate towards this field, and especially working in an agency, um, I can definitely see that there would be like a stereotype of that. Yeah.
yeah. No, there's definitely a lot of now. It's not all. Some are.
Oh yeah.
I can tell. I was able to tell very early on, like, they've been through it and
Hmm.
they're
Hmm.
not affected in a way of being biased. There are some
Gotcha.
who nobody would have an issue working with them.
Right.
Nobody.
Right.
That's just the type of
Hmm.
person that they are. And there are some where it's just I can tell they're sexist. I can tell that they're
Oh,
biased
oh
against
yeah.
men because
Mm.
of the way they act, the way they
They're,
treat, the way that I'm treated.
yeah.
Like, it's like, oh, they always seem to like getting somebody in trouble, or they always say this, or people. And
Yeah.
sometimes it's like I called for help and nobody helped me, and I'm a guy, and my friend told me to keep calling, and it's kind of like when I'm driving a male and his two children to a shelter, and
Right.
I pick up on the empathy. Like, it's not that
Oh
men
yeah.
are different
Yeah.
than women. It's we're dealing with people with empathy and people who are heartless. But to hear that,
Right.
I had to call 6 times, and I've been told we don't help men, we can't do anything for you.
Right. Right.
It's
Oh
like, well,
yeah.
that's not true because I'm driving you here, and
Right.
people said, "Oh, he's making that up because blah blah blah." No, people in your staff
No,
are
people
not
like
helping him.
say, yeah.
There's a
Yeah.
difference.
Ugh. Ugh. So painful. All right. So last little thing here. Any advice for the male victims out there?
Um, there's a lot. One, I think it's like, be aware of the situations, and it's almost like I spend a lot of time warning people, not even just men, but it's more
People.
not about what actions you take or what you do. It's about how that other person can turn this around. And I feel like
Right.
the wrong way, it's not the way I want to work with people. However, a guy fares a better chance if he doesn't have an arrest and a conviction behind something he didn't do.
Right.
And when you talk to the men, they will tell you the story, and they shouldn't have been arrested, But I think looking at situations to avoid potential, like, false accusations, And it depends, if they are looking for shelter, only a portion of the agencies do accept men. There is that
Right.
health thing, but there's also the funding thing that people are going to want to try to avoid. So I can't really knock them for that, because I
Right.
am trying to minimize or get rid of. It's not just a male thing where, oh, they don't want to put them in because they have to get a hotel. They would
Right.
prefer to not use money spent on hotels, because then they risk running out of money.
Right. Right.
But I would, I think it's about acting early, because
Mhm.
a male can call. Um, I think, a male can get turned down or turned away or made to feel like, I think they should
Um,
keep trying. It's very um, difficult. I wouldn't say difficult because it's hard, but, to sit with a man who had to abandon his children,
right.
for fear of
Right.
his own well-being. I'd end up in
Yeah.
jail for the rest of my life if I didn't do this. To sit with a
Right.
person who had to abandon their children for their own well-being, and for the worker to completely understand that they had to do this. This wasn't, I don't care about my kids, I don't want to pay child support.
Right. Oh,
It's,
yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
going to be
Oh,
in jail if I
yeah.
don't disappear. Um,
Right.
it's a place no human being should ever have to arrive to. And I have yet to see, none of this is a knock towards women, but I've yet to see
Oh, gosh. No, no, of
yet
course
to
not.
see many women who are not the disordered abusive person
Right.
have to endure, that sort of trauma.
Right. And I mean, I also like, there's like things that I'm like, okay, can we write to the Department of Justice and see if there's any way we can get funding for this? Is there any way we can appeal to the, just, Connecticut government to this? Is there any way we can, you know, like,
One thing I
support
can say is
that have these things?
I think fighting, on the higher level has to be done
Right.
at some
Right.
point. But I think one thing
Right.
to say to any victim, or male victim especially, is,
Hmm.
one thing I've noticed is, regardless of the situation that is presented to me,
Hmm.
um, I've always been able to give some sort of advice. Or, I mean, sometimes, when I think a simple statement of, how many times have you had to explain this story where you can just tell the person wasn't listening? That warrants such a familiar sigh, in which,
Right.
that's happened a lot. But I think there is always something that can be done, or some action that can be taken, or something that can be researched. So if the situation is ever hopeless, um, I would say reach out, because when you get that right person on the phone, there really is always something that can be done if a person's willing to,
Yeah.
make changes.
Yeah, definitely. All right, so it feels like we've had a natural, ending here. I want to thank you so much for your time,
No
and
problem.
you know, really trying to raise awareness here of like, this is the stuff that happens, and it does happen, to men. I mean, it happens obviously, unfortunately, to women and children as well. But yeah,
Yeah.
just definitely like there are services out there for men, and like, keep looking, keep calling.
Yeah, no, there
Which I
are.
think is a
They're
great thing.
supposed to be
Yeah.
just as equal. Like, that really is what they go for. So if that's, I don't know, I'd complain to a higher level if your people are getting anything less than what they feel they deserve.
Right. Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I'm gonna end here, and again, thanks so much for your time, and we'll talk soon.
You're welcome. Thank you.
All right. Thanks. All right. Bye.
Bye.